something called the Vegetable Drug Act, which simply states no plant is illegal. Period. Just, that's it. And it would all sort itself out. And the junkie could have his little opium garden, and I don't know if cokeheads could get it together enough to fill their backyard with coke. It would all sort out very, very nicely. And it's preposterous. I mean, you know, you read that in the Middle Ages, that in 1432 in Amsterdam, a pig was hung for murder. And then well, that's the kind of thing we've got going with the concept of an illegal plant. I mean, from any future enlightened point of view, they would just look back at that and say, how quaint. You know, what a bizarre notion of reality. Yeah.
I like your idea. You talked about how the legalization of these substances is doesn't fit with our cultural context, and it made me think about legalization, and made me think about making it really okay in my mind to define a law, and to define others' morality in that regard. And that I don't know if I think that it's possible for it to be legal. I really, without a battle, or without a major shift in the way things work, it seems like it's something that I need to take upon myself and say.
Well, I think the hope. The hope comes from Europe. I think America will just be shamed into legalization, because in Europe, you know, the drug laws are very loose, and Europe is a truly secular society. I mean, they just don't have rattlesnake-handling Christers and Branch Davidians and all. They cannot figure this stuff out. I mean, I had a German friend visit me in Hawaii last summer, and I took her to the beach, and she immediately whipped her top off. And then I had to explain that you couldn't do that in America. And she'd said she'd heard you couldn't do that in America, but she couldn't believe that it was actually true. And then when I was looking at her, thought what it would take to make it possible to take your top off at a public beach in America, you just realize this is a society of lost souls. I mean, this is a society of the screwballs that couldn't handle the secularization of Europe and came here to practice what they called religious freedom, which basically meant crypto-fascism on everybody else, you know. Yeah, I agree. Look, black people didn't break loose till they got their backs up. Gay people would have been forever marginalized. They're not handing rights out in this society. You have to take it. And the drug thing has just been a polite conversation for far too long, I think. It's getting a little louder, but weasel arguments are being used. I mean, the reason cannabis is moving toward legalization is because an appeal is being made to the darkest impulses of capitalism. You know, you could make so much money off this. What do you care that it's a drug? You know?
What about the flip side of the rights bill and that responsibility? I sometimes wonder, you know, as much as we like to complain about law and structure, it seems like we also rely on that to provide certain social structures around how something would be. We don't often claim the responsibility. How do you see, let's say, if drugs were legalized, how would we self-manage in a responsible way to make that occur?
Well, I maintain that since alcohol and tobacco are legal, we have already proven that we can absorb the social consequences of legalizing any drug. I mean, if you can tolerate the costs and what alcohol and all that does to insurance, then heroin is going to pose no problem. The problem with the law is that when the law becomes irrational, the law loses its moral force. And so it has to be reformed. And this, is, I believe, very difficult in this drug area because nobody's being straight about what's at issue. The real issue, like let's take cannabis, which is, you know, most people, whether they smoke cannabis or not, have the impression, I think, that this is a generally benign and over-discussed peril. And yet, I cannot imagine America legalizing cannabis simply because its psychological consequences are that it erodes loyalty to the work ethic. You know, if people are not interested in screwing widgets on wonkels if they smoke, and contrast it to caffeine. Now, caffeine is a dangerous drug, does liver damage, is known to be implicated in a number of pathologies. And yet, every contract, every labor contract signed in the Western world enshrines the right of laborers twice a day to stop the assembly line and tank up on coffee. This is an extraordinary folkway. And why? Because caffeine is a made-to-order drug for the purposes of slave capitalism. I mean, you just scurry right back to your keyboard or your assembly line, and you can do the 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. shift then without, you know, falling on your face like a normal primate would if they weren't jacked up on some alkaloid. And so that's very welcome. You know, it was McLuhan who made the point, and it still hasn't been assimilated by enough people, that he said that technologies carry a hidden agenda and shape their user in ways that the user is never conscious of. And the great case that McLuhan made was print, which he said the linear and uniform nature of print created the preconditioned mindset able to accept democracy, the assembly line, the concept of the citizen. A whole bunch of modern ideas are presuppose print. Well, drugs are technologies, and they shape the users in ways that the users never suspect. And our frenzied, goal-oriented, surface-obsessed society is a society of sugar, alcohol, red meat, and television. You know, I mean, television is an incredibly invasive and powerful drug. The average American watches 6 hours a day. Imagine if, following World War II, a drug had been introduced, that now the average American spent 6 hours a day absolutely loaded on this drug, doing nothing else. But because we are materialists, we don't see television as a drug, and yet, you know, your blood pools in your rear end, your brain waves fall into a measurable zone, you fixate. There is an entire set of symptoms no less dramatic than the symptoms of smoking a bomber or honking up a line. So, but we don't see television that way. And the horror of television is you don't even get to have your own trip. You have somebody else's trip, sponsored by the cosmetically enhanced surfaces of products. I mean, talk about a hell drug, my God.